Okay, in this video I want to discuss the nature of conflicting authorities in academic classes that are in the soft sciences like English composition is. Literary criticism would be this way too, as with I think some of the social sciences, especially psychology and social studies, social analysis. And the idea here is, if you have clear set rules of how to proceed with thinking in a certain discipline, say mathematical dicta, or a very well-defined and a conventionally broadly accepted formula like the scientific process, then with those things in play, there are just some things you can say and there's some things you can't. And the more that these rigorous steps are in play in a discipline, the less leeway you have for actual various interpretations. So, if you're in a math class or a chemistry class or a physics class or a statistics class, you don't really have much room to fudge as far as interpretation goes, or the right versus the wrong answer. Obviously, sometimes it's usually many times in these classes and in math classes, it's almost always the time that it's very clear which is the right way to do it, which isn't. But in other classes like journalism or any of the graphic arts, English composition, college writing, technical writing, what have you, you will run into, hopefully there are certain notions that are generally at play across the board, regardless of what institution or instructor you have for these courses or disciplines. But as far as the emphasis that a particular instructor might place on a particular procedure, or the emphasis he or she may place on certain rules, and these rules may not be very well established or very well accepted. Nevertheless, in this person's mind, these rules have somehow entrenched themselves because for various reasons, and have taken upon themselves more authority than they really do have. And so from the instructor's mindset, these are how it needs to be done. This is XYZ, this is how it is. And you may be taught under such a approach. And what you need to do, though, is again, critically assess it and say, well, what is it that says we can't deviate from this? Why might not another approach be equally valid? Why? Now this. Let's get down to the crass sort of questions that, teachers in this discipline will often hear, especially if they're in the same school and the students are migrating from one teacher to the other as the semesters pass. And one person may say, well, I wrote this same type of report for Professor X last semester and I got a B on it. So how in the world are you giving me a D on it? Or, I passed, college writing 1 last semester with an A. Why in the world? There's no way I can be getting a C in college writing 2. And I personally have received students that try to get me involved with some sort of arbitration. For example, they'll send me I had them maybe a year ago, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I'll get an email from them, and they'll have an attached paper, and they'll say, hey, can you look at this? Because I just turned it into a history class or a whatever, and the teacher gave me a C on it. I think it's at least a B. Would you help me? Would you grade this? And without exception, I email the student back and say no, and kinder words than that, but essentially it's the same no. In fact, I may have lost patience a couple times and just basically answered, no, I can't, because there's too many things that need to first be established between professors before any sort of that sort of activity can have any sort of profit to it. So, you know, I will refuse to take part in that sort of shenanigan. But it doesn't really do away with the central question. And the question is, well, how in the world can grading styles be so different across the spectrum of teachers that teach in this discipline? All right, so and, you know, I just attended a norming process a month ago. A norming process is where you get 5, 10, 15 instructors together, and you have them look at maybe one essay or 5 essays. They all get the same 5, and then individually each scores it, and then the proctor or the facilitator sits back and say, okay, you know, out of the 20 that are here, 15 of you graded paper 1 as a B, 3 of you graded it as an F. Okay, now tell me why you graded it as an F. And the 3 that graded it as an F get very, you know, defensive and embarrassed. But then people basically establish, look, you know, the majority of the room considers this paper a B, so don't give it an F. Give it a B, and this is called the norming process. And once a year, I'm heavily involved with being normed. It sounds like a robotic plug-in, close your eyes and let it happen, the download type, right? I wish it were that easy, but I do this nationally on a scale from 1 to 9, and then I am experiencing more house normings. In other words, an individual college will say, well, let's just norm our department. Let's try to do this. And I attended one the other day, and you know, people were giving, okay, you know, the room, the majority of the people gave a certain essay a B, and then there were, or an A, and an A. They were like a nice clump of teachers saying this is an A, and then there were like 2 that called it an F or a D. They're like, hey, you know, that's a big jump. All right. Now just think if the norming hadn't been in process there. You got a student, and it's like, okay, if I somehow manage to get a class with this person, that guy will give, you know, he's one of the persons that gave that paper an A. But that's the very same paper, this other guy gave it an F or a D, you know, it's like the same paper? How does this happen? So that's just a fact of the discipline, which makes any sort of emphasis on grades on this sort of discipline very, very tricky. And I think we do a grave disservice. Okay, this is my personal. I think we do a grave disservice to many students by even insisting grades be assigned. We need to find some sort of other way of motivation. Students automatically sense school has a very high level of artificiality in it, as far as like assignments that are trying to mirror reality, assignments that you would get in the real life, you know, the real world. I hate that distinction, but it does have some sort of, you understand what I'm trying to say there. And so there, you know, I understand the motivation factor, but if a student is motivated by grades, then at the end of the day, that is a wrong motivation, because there's always going to be someone making better grades. And why are we trying to learning has its own reward. And if you don't understand that yet, you will. I am confident that you will. Somewhere down the line, you'll realize, hey, learning, the process itself is the reward. And it should have very little to do with numbers that you're trying to earn. But the point is, the American system is set up to discriminate efficiently and financially among these lines, so they do need some sort of marker. They feel they need some sort of marker, and whether it's justified or not, at this point the system has its momentum, and you know, to break it away from this is a monumental task that I refuse to to even consider taking. So grades are there. Grades is crazy, as Looney Tunes would say. And what do you do with professors that just seem to be so disparate with each other as far as like their notions of what makes good writing? And I just know that you are going to run into someone that says, hey, don't engage in this sort of meta discourse. Don't tell me what you're going to tell me. Don't put your thesis here. Put it over here. Or no, don't arrange it this way. Do it that. And you're like, well, Horn told me this, and he's telling me that, or she's telling me this, and that one told me this one. I was like, who's right? And well, what you need to do is you need to realize that it's still up for debate, and there probably is some items of profit you can take away from every class, but you do need to realize that, as Joseph Williams says, if you buy this book and you read this book, Style, 10 Lessons in Clarity of Grace, he has a whole chapter on fake rules, and there are many reasons people get a hold of this in composition and hold it close to their hearts, and they're your teachers, and they want it done a certain way, and this is the wrong way, this is the right, and you're realizing this is not a real rule. Well, my advice to you would be roll with the class, do what the teacher is asking you to do, but become wiser in the end in just saying, look, there really are other ways to do this, or that really isn't a rule. But she or he seems to be so enthralled with it, or so insistent upon it, that to try to make my point and to try to challenge this notion would be an endeavor I would never win. And you really are, there are very few times when you are going to challenge a teacher in the classroom concerning a way of teaching that this person has imbibed and has become entrenched in over the years. And you usually are not going to change the teacher. In fact, you'll just antagonize the situation and isolate yourself, probably. So I would just say, do within reason, of course, and of course within what you know is right and just and the path of the truth. Do what the teacher is asking you to do concerning format, style, and all that. But please do not ever think that any writing rule is a rule that never should be broken, or is a genuine rule. Language just doesn't work that way. The other thing I would say is you really do need to run to the published material for this, and I use this so often. This is it just makes it so clear to me. For example, this is just one case in point. Okay, I'll have students come and tell me, well, I was taught that I cannot use the I or the me or the my in writing, the first person pronoun, that I need to stay away from it. And I will respond to that student and I'll say, hey, well, let's just go to the published work nowadays. Let's look at newspaper articles, let's look at magazine articles, let's look at books, let's look at popular books, let's look at academic books, and let's look at academic journals. So let's get 5 samples of each. And we will find the I all over the place. So even in the rigorous academic writing, this was a notion that was in fad, faddish. It was a fad a few years ago. It did have a pedagogical advantage to it, because one thing you want to stop the student from doing is pretending to make objective evaluation where really all that person is doing is spewing out subjective, arbitrary, personal response to something. Okay, so you really do have an opinion that's based on objective fact, objective reasoning and warrants and values and definitions. Then you have a whole different type of opinion that's based on taste. So you have 2 types of opinions out there, right? So when you ask a student, hey, give me your opinion on this work, we don't want the personal taste stuff, because obviously that's encourageable. As a teacher, we cannot challenge that, because you're the world's most authority on your personal taste. So, we don't want that sort of opinion. We want the objective opinion, and that's not an oxymoron. So that's the skill we need to teach. One way to make it sort of easy for us to force you away from the personal one is to take away the I, because it's very hard to talk about your personal experiences and your personal delights or disgusts if you cannot use the first person pronoun, unless you are like the wrestler The Rock, who refers to himself in the third person. The Rock is in the ring, So if you don't do that, you're going to have a hard time talking about yourself without the first person pronoun. So we take it away so that you stop talking about yourself implicitly in your writing. It's a cheap trick, and it backfires because students then think, oh, well, I can never use the I. No, 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 of course you can. Go to the published work. Do a sampling. Can you see it show up? Sure. So, another thing I stress in academic research is a schematic where you take time out somewhere in the beginning in the first third of the paper and say, hey, look, this is my thesis. These are my main points. This is how I organize the rest of the paper. First I do this, second I do this, third I do this. So it's sort of an outline in a paragraph form. And it, some teachers really don't like that because they think it disrupts the read. They think it's unnecessary because if you really write clearly and effectively, professionally, which is very hard for a student to write, you don't need to necessarily say, this is how I've organized the paper, because in theory, at least, the organization of the paper is going to be so obvious and clear, you got to be half blind and dead to not to not get it. So that's what some teachers are going to say, so you don't need the schematic. Well, then I'll say, so now you're thinking, well, who's right, Horn or this teacher? I mean, I thought I needed the schematic, and this teacher's saying no. How do I do this? Go to the published work. Go to the published work. Let's get 10 academic journal articles. Put them out before you. 6 out of 10 are going to have a schematic somewhere in the first third of the paper, the essay, the article. So at that point, I rest my case. I say, look, 3/5, 6 out of 10 are going to do this. I think then there's no way I can say that this is intrinsically wrong, right? I will never say it's intrinsically wrong to include a schematic if in the published work itself, from different presses, from different editorial boards, right, 6 out of the 10 have the schematic. So, but still you'll have a teacher insist that you shouldn't have a schematic. What you need to do then is say, hey, at the end of the day, I basically I need to have the mastery over my own writing instruction. All right, and you need to go through these classes so that you get the starting tools. But eventually, you are going to be the one that turns yourself into that writer. You can't just listen to one voice. All right, you've got to listen to a multiplicity of voices about this, and then you've got to cull or harvest out those bits of advice that you think are going to work based on what is being published at the moment. Now, see, the thing is, it seems to do students a disservice if you're always like, well, let's are you going to publish your work? Are you going to publish your work? Because we're far from that. I know that. But as far as how I approach this as a discipline to be taught, if the ultimate arbitration is the publishing board, I've got to introduce this factor, if only theoretically, as a heuristic, a way of allowing us to make the right decisions as to what to teach, what to learn, how to write. And the heuristic would be the question, what works in the publishing world at this moment? So, because that's the ultimate, it seems to me, aside from the assessment of truth, which is the prerogative of the divine, the ultimate test of what actually works in writing is what is actually being read by the public readership. So, just a watch out for the way this would go wrong is for you to say, I had one teacher tell me this. Now I have the other teacher tell me the other thing, the opposite. I conclude nobody knows what they're talking about. Thus, I also conclude this discipline is not even worth learning because no one really knows how it works in the first place. So, I stopped caring about this. I'm going to stop trying to learn this. See, that's the wrong way to go. That's just, I would say, as soon as you go down that path, you've actually made the wrong decision out of so many right ones you could make. So, but it happens. It's going to happen all the time. And I don't want you to challenge the teachers in their own classroom. I don't think you're going to ever win that battle. I think you earn the right to be heard by going through the process and coming back as a professional writer, and then you interject your voice. As a student, I would basically give the instructor the format or the style that he or she is insisting upon while quietly acknowledging to myself, this is probably one of those areas where it's okay to do it another way, but I'm not going to insist on it because I don't want to suffer any unfair repercussions concerning the assessment of my work now. It's worth something to think about because I do think you're going to run into this problem in other writing classes, just teachers that do it differently. But on a more general scope, you're going to run across this notion of conflicting authorities that are in a place of a consequential assessment of your work. In other words, they're going to assess your work in such a way that has consequences on something related to you, your grades, your resume, whatever. Just realize this is a sticky point for the soft sciences, and it also shows up in some of the harder sciences too, but it's certainly going to be here, and I think you need to handle it correctly, and the first step in doing so is to be aware of its possibility. I am sure you'll run into it soon enough. So